My earliest inspiration was the adult game Muv Luv Alternative, in which aliens invade and humankind is on the brink of annihilation, and yet people are still at each other's throats. It came with a thick commentary booklet. The game's universe also had Japan emerge victorious from World War II and retain its imperial system, and then there's the Eurasian continent already occupied by the aliens, making Japan the front line for the war of resistance. Hello everyone, I'm Wave, and that was one of many quotes from the writer and creator of Attack on Titan. Upon first hearing would probably sound just like some sort of hearsay, but there is some truth to the specific topic I want to talk about, being how the writer and creator of Attack on Titan has noted that his original inspirations for Attack on Titan came from his time reading Muv Luv Alternative when he was younger. When I had first heard about that, I did a little bit of research, and when I had looked at least on YouTube, there wasn't really much, if at all, like substance to that kind of claim. There was very little as far as like what one of those different quotes came from is this idea of Attack on Titan, quote unquote, ripping off Muv Luv. And when I had looked at it, it was like very just small, like very like bare bones comparison stuff of like, oh, look at that, the protagonists between both of them have a similar haircut, and stuff that is in some ways kind of true in like, oh, the Titans are based off of the beta from Muv Luv Alternative. But in that time since, I noticed that there is a lot more information going around on the internet now, to where you can go ahead and do a suitable amount of research into like all the various comparisons between both of those. I don't think that like Attack on Titan is a quote unquote ripoff of Muv Luv, and there is just like this level of inspiration, but it actually heavily diverges. This is going to be the obligatory spoiler warning for the video. If you have not read all of the original Muv Luv trilogy, or I guess specifically Muv Luv Alternative, and then also alongside that, if you have not read or watched all of Attack on Titan, I would urge you to go ahead and do so, but come on, man. You haven't watched Attack on Titan yet? But yeah, I'm going to be talking about spoilers, most notably about the literal endings between both of them and how I feel like both series feel pretty different from one another. So let's get into it. So I think multiple times, just from multiple different cases, the writer of Attack on Titan has gone on to say, yeah, he liked Muv Luv Alternative back in the day when he was reading it, and that he was heavily inspired from sort of like some of the themes and just like overall story beats of Muv Luv, and how he wanted to kind of incorporate that into his story. One of the quotes that I saw, which was that like of where he says he quote unquote rips off Muv Luv, is that he purposely used Muv Luv Alternative's like narrative, and he was like inspired to create his own story because he wanted to like punish the world, I guess, in a way. He wanted to have people read his story and feel the pain that he felt while he was reading Muv Luv Alternative. And I think already off the bat, if you finish Muv Luv Alternative, I think you could probably tell as to like maybe he took away something that I felt was pretty different from like when I had finished reading Muv Luv Alternative. But we can get there. I think when you look at both series, there is some noticeable comparisons. Obviously, like from the outset, you could see, oh yeah, we have Beta, we have Titans. They kind of have like different gear, right? You know, where Muv Luv is very nuanced in that it tells you about like, oh, these are the Beta that can like shoot laser beams from their eyes. So you have to like be cautious of them from like long range, but then this Beta is very close range. And then Attack on Titan with the Titans is kind of like that. You have different variants of like notable Titans, and then you also in some ways simplify the way of defeating the enemy by having it to where you're going to cut them in the neck, and then that is like the way to defeat a Titan. You have like mechs in Muv Luv, and then you have like the ODM gear in Attack on Titan. When it comes to like the comparisons between these two, I think Muv Luv gets heavily compared to Attack on Titan ever since this like information from the multiple different interviews to come out to where Muv Luv, I guess, has been in a somewhat weird spot for like the past couple of years. It kind of slowed down. There hasn't been too many like brand new things. They had teased a follow-up to Muv Luv Alternative, I don't know how long ago, and then in that time since, there hasn't really been any progress being made, at least as far as what fans are aware. There has been multiple other just like side projects. You had stuff like Project Mikhail that was kind of a flop. It didn't really like take hold as to like how much I would imagine they really wanted it to like take off as, where it was basically just Muv Luv Alternative again, but with like actual combat, and then they had like full voice acting for like English voice acting, and I don't know. You had like, I don't think it was a flop in Japan at least, but like you had the Muv Luv Alternative anime, and then you've got countless numbers of gacha games. And I think Muv Luv, at least in the West, has been doing pretty solid so far. We've been consistently getting translations of older stuff that has been releasing onto Steam. I would think that Muv Luv as a series is pretty stable as of current right now, but it has been like a little bit on a downward trend, and that has kind of led to people really heavily comparing Muv Luv to Attack on Titan and saying, oh wow, Muv Luv is kind of just trying to chase off of the coattails of Attack on Titan now. They are struggling to really like get their bearings because they have fallen off pretty damn hard, and that like you can see the success of Attack on Titan and be like, okay, well, they did it better. I think in some ways there isn't really any sort of like bad blood. You can see that the writer of Attack on Titan has actually appeared on like multiple different events for Muv Luv, whether it be like some sort of anniversary or whatever, right? But at the same time, you can see that Muv Luv has been like trying to use the name of Attack on Titan to kind of like uplift themselves. And I think that's why people have actually like really dug into the thought of, did Attack on Titan rip off Muv Luv? And I think when I look at it, I'm somebody that wasn't reading the manga, but I know when the manga for Attack on Titan dropped, I saw a lot of people online like saying that the ending was like really bad, and then I was really surprised because at that point I had finished reading Muv Luv Alternative, and I was like, wait, if this was actually like a ripoff, how would it have been like, what could Attack on Titan have possibly done to ruin things? When I compare both of these series, I would say there's two major things that come to mind for me personally that really set them apart and make it to where I wouldn't say Attack on Titan is a quote-unquote ripoff. One being the characters, and then two being the actual like finale and ending for both of these series. When you look at Muv Luv, right, the writer for Attack on Titan specifically states Muv Luv Alternative, but obviously you would have read Muv Luv Extra, right? I would imagine so. The characters are across all three games, and the core like group between both main characters in both of those series is somewhat similar, but I think is like different enough to where you can already see where it's like a little bit of inspiration taken, but mix things up. So in Muv Luv you have Takaru being the main character, and then you've got Sumika and Maya, while in Attack on Titan you have Eren, you've got Mikasa, and then you've got Armin. And I think already you can look at, you know, the gender ratio, and you can see that in Muv Luv you have 1 male to 2 female, while in Attack on Titan you have 2 male to 1 female. And then also just real quick, what I've noticed too is that people, you know, really harp on this comparison between Attack on Titan and Muv Luv, but in one of the interviews I found, even the creator of Attack on Titan said that the very first character he designed was Mikasa, not Eren, and he specifically named her after like a battleship or like warship, and he specifically stated that the reason why he did that is because he noticed other like anime characters that were also named after like warship were pretty popular. And one of the examples he gave was like Nagato Yuki from the Melancholy of Haruhi Suzumiya. And I think the writer of Attack on Titan, the more that you dig into his interviews, you see he kind of throws out like names of series willy-nilly. He's not really tight-lipped, and he will consistently just name all kinds of different like media inspirations that he took, whether that be from like Haruhi Suzumiya, Berserk, and like a whole host of other things. So I would think it is kind of like weird that the visual novel community has like really gripped onto the thought of Attack on Titan and Muv Luv when there is a whole host of other different inspirations that the writer has stated before. Getting back onto the main character comparisons, I think it's kind of interesting because When you look at Mikasa, I want to say she's somewhat filling the role of both Sumika and Maya. Obviously, she's quite like competent with fighting, so I would say she is kind of like Maya in that sense, but at the same time, when we get deeper into Attack on Titan, she kind of fills a little bit of that role that Sumika would have as like the main love interest that you would get from Alternative. But at the same time, it is weird because obviously you have Armin is almost off to the side as just like a supporting role, and the story of Attack on Titan really does just heavily focus onto Eren and then Mikasa. And I think one of the things going into how like the actual story plays out is that as when we get deeper into Attack on Titan and Eren, the main character that like you have been seeing the story through, flips and we are suddenly expected to see Eren as like this villain, you're now as the audience looking for someone else to like play that protagonist role and be the character that you're going to root for now that Eren has turned into a villain, and you're going to be naturally drawn to Mikasa. And so now all of a sudden you are essentially experiencing the story through somebody else's eyes, somebody that has been with us throughout the entirety of the story of Attack on Titan. But it feels like it's very weird in how they do it, and you kind of just have to flop over to the side of Mikasa. And in that way, I feel like it's very vastly different from what you would have seen in Muv Luv Alternative, to where you are still within the perspective of Takaru throughout like the entirety of the Muv Luv trilogy. So you really get to see and experience it through his eyes, and never once really have to call into question the motives of Takaru as well, because we get to actually see and, you know, feel the inner thoughts as he's going through everything throughout the story of Muv Luv. And then so I would say when you compare Takaru and Eren, they feel very different because of the fact of how one is like the hero throughout the entirety of the story, and while Takaru does make mistakes, he learns from them and he like betters himself through it. Whereas when we look at Eren, I remember just like a lot of people weren't really happy with the ending of Attack on Titan. I went ahead and actually asked my friends again just to get like a little bit of a like refresher on how they had felt, but I had already kind of known, and that like everyone in my friend group kind of also felt that way when we got to the end of Attack on Titan, as far as like the anime at least, where it felt just very strange that you could follow Eren for like 3 whole seasons, and then by the time we get to the 4th season, all of a sudden the story just flips, and it feels like, in a way, it kind of is almost like that like initial quote that people kind of throw around of the writer of Attack on Titan really wanting to like make people suffer and experience the pain that he had felt while playing Muv Luv Alternative, and that he kind of turned Attack on Titan into this just like, let's see how many people we can kill off. And I don't know, it felt very just like off-putting, and in a way too, it kind of comes to like a close that doesn't really feel like it was. That Attack on Titan's finale doesn't really live up to the journey that you took to get there. But that's besides the point. I think just like in general too, when you compare the literal endings of Muv Luv Alternative and Attack on Titan, you could say there's like a little bit of like parallels and, you know, inspirations taken, to where, you know, within Muv Luv there is like the tree on the hill that is pretty important, and then you've got the tree in Attack on Titan as well. But also when you look at just like Muv Luv Alternative, while you leave the timeline behind to where everything has been like left to pieces, the battle has not yet been won, but you're able to return back to the previous timeline while fixing things, and Takaru gets a happy ending. Attack on Titan is kind of left on this like somber, melancholy note, to where Mikasa is kind of left alone, and Eren perishes in like his own morals and what he had sought out to do, why he became the villain. But I don't know, I do really think that the writer of Attack on Titan was really harping on the fact of like how maybe he was like really hurt in like the quote unquote like final dungeon of Muv Luv Alternative, to where all like the original main cast of Muv Luv Extra dies while trying to fight the boss of the area, and how Takaru has to kind of let everyone die in order to see the mission through and get his mission completed, and that he's going to try and save his timeline. And so I think the writer of Attack on Titan was probably really heavily impacted by the death sequences of all the main heroines from Muv Luv Extra, and made that like the core fundamental takeaway that he had wanted to put into Attack on Titan when he was first deciding to make the story. But yeah, this has been something I kind of just wanted to talk about because every once in a while you will see people talking about it, and if you go ahead and you do some research, you see that there is a fair amount of comparisons, but I almost feel like those comparisons have been taken a little too far, and in a way Muv Luv has kind of been like put in like the spotlight because of the extra attention that Attack on Titan has like put onto it, and I almost feel like that's a little unfair. And then also just, I don't know, I genuinely do think it is kind of interesting that if you look at both series, that fundamentally I feel like they are different enough to where I wouldn't say that Attack on Titan rips off Muv Luv. But I don't know. Those have just been my thoughts on the matter. Thank you guys for watching. I've been Wave, and I will see you next time.